Hello everybody and welcome to this month's Specifying Practice Group call. With that, I want to hand over to Dave and Lewis to get started and hope to learn some info from you. Dave and Lewis, over to you.
Okay, so Lewis, how in the world did you come up with today's topic?
Well, you and I were kicking around ideas, and we decided that there were some interesting things that we could talk about today about to keep us from getting into trouble. There are some liability issues, but there's also some issues where we can waste time by specifying things that don't exist or don't happen. And but there are also some very positive things that we can do to improve quality, because what we're all interested in is having quality products installed correctly to keep our clients happy and to safeguard our reputations.
And to allow us to spend less time during CA.
And that too.
So I like the two questions here. Why in the world would we even bother? And then how in the world are we ever going to accomplish specifying manufacturer and installer qualifications? So those are really the two topics that we're going to explore today. Whether you agree or not, chime in, let us know what you're doing, and we're all here to learn. So Lewis and I certainly don't know everything. We would love to hear how you're dealing with some of these things as well. So Lewis, you want to start this off?
Well, we're going to start with manufacturer qualifications, and we're talking here about when we have to specify manufacturer qualifications as opposed to selecting and specifying manufacturers and proprietary products in Part 2. So let's go to the first slide. First, we have to think about what kind of manufacturer, in effect, do we have? Is the product a commodity product like cement for concrete, where we don't really need to name names? On the other hand, if we're expecting a product to meet certain performance requirements, then we might we do need to think about, well, how do we qualify the manufacturer and how do we specify that quality? Same thing for aesthetic qualities, that there are certain products that we want a certain look for, and that may only be available from one or two or three manufacturers. And then finally, we have to think about those manufacturers. A typical manufacturer is going to make, thousands and thousands of light fixtures or light switches or whatever. Some products have some limited options for color or other aesthetic considerations, or operational options that we can order. Specifying an elevator is a lot like buying a new car, which I haven't done in about 40 years. But you sit down with a dealer and you go through what you want in the car and what you want in the elevator. And then finally, there's the custom fabrication, where you have local fabrication shops, such as architectural woodwork or sheet metal, that make custom fabrications to the size and out of the materials that we specify. And so we do need to think about, well, how do we qualify who can do that? Just because two guys have a pickup truck and they can have enough money to buy sheet metal, does that make them a good sheet metal fabricator?
Well, and some of these things might even change job to job, because what might be a commodity on Project A might very well be an important design consideration on Project B.
There is definitely that.
Right? So one of the things that we can use to try to help us with specifying manufacturer quality is industry standards, right? The there are plenty of standards out there now that we can rely on and simply specify. The Structure Steel Painting Council, for instance, has all kinds of paint standards which include the paint installation, not just the paint products. So we can do, where we have those kinds of standards available, we can rely on them as a way to help. We can look to agencies that are out there actually inspecting, or associations that are inspecting the work, to make sure that the products are being built according to the specification, according to those association or agency standards. Lewis mentioned AWI, and that's one that I like to use as an example, because the Architectural Woodwork Institute has quality set up not only for the installation but also for the manufacture of products. And if you're specifying their quality program, we'll actually visit the fabricator's shop to make certain that the products are being manufactured to the AWI standards.
Similarly, the Precast Concrete Institute not only publishes industry standards for making architectural precast, but they have a series of qualifications for the precast manufacturers or fabricators to meet for different types of precast, and they do spot checks from time to time to make sure that the fabricators are in fact complying with the standards. On the other hand, there are industry associations published standards that don't have any inspection at all from time to, so
and
they are
those
voluntary.
Really a big help?
Those are voluntary standards that people, you have to rely on the manufacturer's word that they comply with, say, the Steel Door Institute specifications or whatever.
But Steel Door Institute, I can't let you get off on that one. They actually do periodic inspections of the manufacturer.
Oh, that's right, they do. I sit corrected.
All right, we don't want anyone to have a misunderstanding there. Okay. Here's one of my favorite. Trying to specify a manufacturer's experience. You know, are we really trying to rely on what kind of experience are we trying to have them provide? I mean, it's really more about the AE's experience probably with the manufacturer on past projects. It could be the contractor's experience with a particular manufacturer for a number of reasons. It could be somebody that he's able to get good credit with, to be able to get good delivery or good service. And it might actually be, in part the last one, some of the legal limitations within the manufacturer's service to the industry.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, also on the legal limitations, when I was practicing in Ohio, the state of Ohio had a requirement, a manufacturer requirement, that all brick used in state of Ohio projects had to be manufactured in Ohio. So that was a standard requirement. But then there are other states, I think you were mentioning, that where you may not be allowed to list certain manufacturer qualifications because the states are so afraid of being sued for restraint of trade.
Well, there are other couple of examples, and I'm sure everybody can cite some of those. Pennsylvania requires Pennsylvania-made steel. You know, Virginia, for publicly bid work, requires Virginia manufacturers to be given preference, top position in the list of manufacturers.
Mark Gillingham brings up the point of regarding experience of manufacturer, you just pre-qualify them and list accepted manufacturers. And again, what we were trying to say is there are some cases where we may not want to name names in Part 2. And whether it's a restriction because we're doing a GSA project and for some other projects you're not allowed to list proprietary manufacturers, or in the case of some commodity items like again, if it's a publicly funded project, you may not be able to list a single brick manufacturer, and so you may need to list some form of requirements for the qualifications for the manufacturer in Part 1 as opposed to listing products in Part 2. Dave Metzger says certain jurisdictions, for example Virginia, do not allow contractor or manufacturer years of experience to be specified.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite, Dave. So thanks for bringing that one up. But, with Mark's point, though, trying to pre-qualify manufacturers, and think about what the implications of that may mean. So if you're pre-qualifying, now you're pushing that experience evaluation into the bidding period that may be quite limited, and if you end up with many manufacturers that you are trying to pre-qualify, that could be an exorbitant task for the AE team to get through all of those qualifications and actually qualify the manufacturers before receiving bids.
Tommy Smith has a point that we're going to be discussing as we go on. This is if there are conflicting requirements between specified installer qualifications and manufacturer warranty requirements for installer qualifications, which prevails. And so we'll be keeping that in the back of our head. Larry Whitlock comments that this morning I received an email from Paul Bates with UL in the Environment Division. He's also a CSI member of the Atlanta chapter. He wrote to offer UL's free resources to help with project specs and sustainability goals by providing a free online database that has more than 250,000 products that will help identify and source the most suitable sustainable ones. And additionally attached was CSI master spec formatted language for specifying low-emitting products such as those found in Green Guard certification programs and so forth. So that's handy.
Yeah, and that may be helpful for selecting products, but I'm not certain that that gets us to a manufacturer qualification. And Sheldon is commenting, if you specify installers, are you responsible for when they screw up? After all, you said they were okay. Well, Sheldon, you're ahead of us. We're talking about manufacturers. Installers comes later. But, maybe you will be. You could apply the same thing to the manufacturers. If you're going to spec a manufacturer as being acceptable, you may be liable because you've already said that they're okay and their product is fine for the application. Okay, so, you had something else here, Louis?
No.
Okay, so one of the things that you may want to at least be concerned about looking at manufacturers for qualifications is their capacity. Can they produce for a particular project? Can they deliver the required product? Can they deliver it on time? I went through that with a particular glass configuration where what I ended up discovering after the architect had selected the construction that he wanted was that there was very limited production of this particular glass construction, and it actually, the manufacturer required each project to be approved, essentially pre-approved on a case-by-case basis, because they were because they only had limited capacity, and they were going to be very picky about the projects that they took on. So, the capacity, depending upon what the product is, could be a really important consideration. You haven't run into something like that yet, Lewis? Not recently?
Well, actually, yes, because there was an announcement going around that one of the major fabricators of insulating glass units is all booked up at capacity for the next year or so. So that they're not accepting new orders for about a year.
So what do you do when you spec their product and now it's unavailable?
You have to go to somebody else. Be prepared to. That's not usually a question we ask manufacturers' reps, because they want to sell as much as they can. So that's kind of an unusual situation for a manufacturer to tell us up front that they've already hit their capacity and they can't, don't specify their products for the next year.
Okay. Service might be another thing that you can haul out and use as a way to specify manufacturer's qualifications. I know that we have some very biased opinions about some manufacturers, but I will also tell you that it's very regional. That here in the East Coast, for instance, I have one aluminum framing manufacturer that I will probably never specify on the East Coast because the local service here is absolutely horrendous. That same manufacturer on the West Coast provides tremendous local service. So I have run into this in more than just one instance where regionally the service can vary tremendously. And that may be a very important consideration depending upon how complex a particular project is. If it's a run-of-the-mill, you can use standard components. Maybe it's not so important. If it takes any kind of design to get to the end result, this service capacity may be a very important consideration.
Yes, certain operating equipment, you may want to specify somebody who can respond to an emergency call within 4 hours or whatever, or has a service location within 50 miles or 100 miles or whatever of the project site.
Okay, I like this question from Rob Moore. Lewis, this one's for you. Shouldn't manufacturers' credit rating be taken into account when warranty is required?
We'll talk about that when we get to the warranties, but that is definitely something that we want to think about, and that's one of the dirty secrets of ACM cladding. Oh,
what a lead-in, eh? Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, how about that? It's very possible to specify warranty terms that no manufacturer will be willing to warrant, will be willing to stand behind. And I myself, there's a RCOM in Master Spec, a number of sections has warranty forms where we're actually specifying the terms and conditions. And I think that's very questionable practice, because my firm is not licensed in the state of Tennessee to practice law. We're licensed to practice architecture and engineering. And I am very, very reluctant to specify the actual language of a warranty. It's one thing to say I want a 20-year, no dollar limit, non-prorated, whatever, warranty against certain things, but it's another to actually specify the terms. In my experience, one of the states I worked in, they had their own written warranty that for roofing, and roofing manufacturers had designed the state's warranty form, not their own standard warranty form. And one of the major manufacturers of roofing, that is a family-owned, closely held business, but has been around for about 100 years and makes excellent roofing, said, we can live without the state business. We're not going to do it. So those are the specified terms. And as Rob says, we do need to kind of think about, you know, are the pockets deep enough that if there is a failure, something will happen. I mentioned that this is one of the dirty secrets of ACM cladding, is that the manufacturer of the system that holds the panels on the wall and keeps it from blowing away in a high wind is not the manufacturer of the panel itself. There are, you know, the three or four or five major manufacturers of ACM panels, but they are kind of like the manufacturers of plywood, that people take their product and make different things out of them. And so you're really at the mercy of, in general, a local fabricator who cobbles together a system with these aluminum extrusions to actually hold the ACM panels on the wall, and is cutting and bending them to shape to fabricate them. And in many cases, you probably won't know the names of those fabricators, and you're certainly not going to specify them. So the warranty that you may get from, say, a Lucobond is only going to cover the finish and delamination. And if the panel, the finish fails, or the panel delaminates, they'll be happy to supply you with a brand new panel if you can prove that it was a manufacturing defect. So, which also brings us to the next question: is it meaningful, or is it not a meaningful warranty? But as I say, many local fabricators may not have the deep pockets or the sufficient insurance to actually cover a meaningful warranty for an ACM cladding project. So think about that the next time you do a 20-story building with ACM cladding on it. There are a couple of nationally known manufacturers who do fabricate ACM cladding and do have a meaningful, therefore, warranty, because they are very large companies. Firestone comes to mind, but there are some others too.
Well, and keep in mind, warranty, the one word that's missing in front of it, when manufacturers write the warranty, it is a limited warranty.
Yes.
And the purpose of writing the warranty is really to limit the manufacturer's responsibilities to a point where they are not going to be out-of-pocket big bucks. So my take on warranties is I would rather be much more careful about selecting the manufacturers and the products and forgo the warranty, knowing that I've already done the due diligence to get what is an appropriate product on the project. I like some of the other comments that we have here, and
yes,
I don't know if you want, let me start with Elias Saltz.
Okay.
It says we're talk about qualifying glazing framing manufacturers based on their own experience. On Lewis, years in my experience, with the service provided by the manufacturers in previous projects. And he's wondering, how can you do that without naming names? And Elias, I would say you're absolutely right. And in the case of trying to qualify the manufacturers based upon the service, it's really what you don't say. So you just simply don't include the manufacturer that you don't want, and then look very carefully about whether or not you're willing to even accept substitutions or comparable products for that particular item. And we have limited it so that there is only select competition for those items.
I had an experience, Elias, in Ohio, again, while I was up there, when we were doing state projects. One of the things that I put into my specifications on a regular basis for non-state work also was for manufacturer qualifications for elevators. is that the elevator manufacturer had to actually make the primary components of the elevatoring system. That is, they had to make the car, the controls, the hoisting apparatus, and so forth. And that was to stave off. There was a company at that time, this is back in the 80s and early 90s, that bought components from multiple sources and cobbled together a system. And they were lousy elevators. I've ridden in them. They vibrate, they're noisy, and the finish was not good. It was very unsatisfactory. So I would put that in there just to stave off substitution requests and so forth. But the state of Ohio were so nervous about being sued that they would always force me to take that paragraph out of the specs. I'd always put it in there, and then during the bidding process, this company would protest, the state would make me take it out. But that was an example of where a manufacturer qualifications, rather than relying just on a list of acceptable manufacturers in Part 2, I was using that to augment it to try to stave off substitutions from another source and document what I thought was a pretty rational reason for not allowing them.
Okay. Hey, Evan Adams is asking or stating warranties are not a bendable item for multinational manufacturers. It can make for a difficult bid target in or equal or performance specs. That can be true, Evan, and I would hold out another example where you can potentially use it to your advantage. We have one client that we work with that absolutely insists that waterproofing, below-grade waterproofing, come with material and labor warranty. There is one manufacturer that will routinely provide the labor warranty, and most of the other manufacturers do not. So this particular client actually plays one manufacturer against the other to get both to offer the labor warranty. So you can take advantage of some of the manufacturers. You put them in a competitive situation if they want the project. Their typical warranties can be bendable.
Susan McClendon asks the question on regards to ACM, and we have a couple questions on ACM. Wouldn't the fabricator be considered the wall system manufacturer and deserve research and specifying? And I agree completely with that, Susan. The problem is many times we don't know who that is, especially the competing ones. I mean, there's a company here in Nashville that covers most of Tennessee. I've known them since I was practicing down in 1995 when I moved to Tennessee. I lived in Memphis for a while. And, you know, they do fine work and quality work, and I have no problem with them on my jobs. But if I get somebody anymore, any project of any size, you may be getting fabricators who are coming in from 300-400 miles away to bid on it, and it's difficult to research all those regional fabricators or manufacturers to find out if they do a quality job and do they have the financial and or insurance backing to be able to back up a warranty if the stuff comes off the walls. And Karen Wood asked then, well, how do you word your ACM warranty requirements? And as I say, that's a bit problematic, that there's no easy answer to that. And that's one of my gripes with the master spec section from ARCOM, is they do not really make that clear who is actually responsible for holding the panels on the wall. But well, that's the critical part, but not making the panels.
Louis, you can make that statement as part of the qualifications that the manufacturer must be the one providing the cladding and the backup framing and the engineering, so that that you're assigning essentially a single point responsibility as a manufacturer, whomever assumes it.
That's true. I mean, generally we do specify performance requirements for ACM cladding, especially if it's above 2 or 3 stories in height.
Okay, so moving on though, hey Louis, we're specifying all of the qualifications for manufacturers. What are you going to ask for in the submittals? And are you going to review them?
Well, that's the handy thing about informational submittals, that if we do ask for stuff, we can just throw it in a file drawer someplace, and we're not obligated to look at it as long as it's just a check to see if it's responsive or not. And again, if the contractor is picking the manufacturer, I don't need to look at it because the contractor is going to take responsibility for that selection. So in the case of a publicly funded project where I'm not allowed to name names in Part 2, I just set out the criteria. The designer is allowed to rely on the skill, expertise, and judgment of the contractor in selecting those products. It's the same as them picking whatever brand of cement that is going to be used on the project, because I'm not going to specify brands of cement and other commodity type items. And if it's a specified manufacturer, I've listed the ones that we have confidence in, and so I don't need to see a submittal for manufacturer requirements for them either.
So if it's a specified manufacturer, we've already listed them, listed their products, do we need to establish any qualifications?
I don't think so.
And I would agree with you that if we're already taking that responsibility to do the research, name the manufacturers, name the products, you've already made your selection. And whether they meet the whatever qualifications you lay out or not really is irrelevant, because you've already told the contractor there's your shopping list.
Yes. Doug Cruz points out that in California, to meet state bidding requirements, we only need to provide 3 manufacturers, and thus no substitutions are required. And again, most publicly funded projects are like that, and even more of them are going with a CM arrangement so that they can do fast-track construction. And so we don't get into the situation as often as we used to where we're not allowed to name names in Part 2. But it does happen still. One of my good friends who works in contract administration for another firm sent me this photo of some fire stopping that maybe did not meet the standards of the fire stopping contractors of America, or whatever their name is. Or the UL qualified,
got to work.
Or the UL qualified fire stop contractor program requirements.
The business owner may not be happy they use that much material.
To me, it looks like it's suffering from what my dear late mother used to call gaposis, which I found a very handy word. There are a lot of spaces in the interstitial spaces there that gas and smoke flame and smoke could pass through.
So this is one of my favorite discussion points here, Louis.
Just to, pardon me just a minute, Dave, to wrap up on our manufacturer qualifications, Tommy Smith points out that really the specifiers should spend more time investigating and comparing warranties before specifying. And that can even affect whether or not you use a product. I advise all of our dear listeners.
Louis? Matt? Okay.
I'm back.
Okay.
I was going to say I advise all of our listeners, before your designer sets his heart or her heart on using EIFS, to look at what the warranty really says about EIFS from the various manufacturers, and it's a real eye-opener. In many cases, if a warranty is only for 1 or 2 years from a manufacturer, I won't even list it, because the statute of repose in the state probably gives the owner more protection anyway.
An excellent point. So, moving on to the installers then, one of my favorite dilemmas with specifying installer qualifications is just whose qualifications are we specifying?
Ah.
So are we looking at the business entity, the actual business
The subcontractor.
qualifications? Yeah, as, the home office? Is it their purchasing procedures? Is it their credit? Is it their, whatever it might be for the business itself? Is it the people in the field? Who is it that we actually want to qualify? Do we want to know that the craftsmen out in the field are the ones that actually know what they're doing? Do we want to know the supervisor who's in charge of all of those craftsmen in the field know what he's doing so he can instruct them? Or is it the project manager sitting in the home office?
To that end, could you switch over and let me show my screen for just a minute?
What surprise do you have for us?
I've got a couple of paragraphs from, let's see, okay. I have a couple of paragraphs here of install qualifications, and I've borrowed these from ARCOM Master Spec. The first is for fluid applied membrane air barriers, and it says not only is the installer, presumably that's the subcontracting entity, as you put it, licensed by ABAA and its quality assurance program, but it employs certified installers and supervisors. And then the penetration fire stopping, that the installer has been evaluated by UL, and again I assume that for compliance with the UL qualified fire stop contractor program requirements, and is acceptable to the manufacturer. And then I added the next sentence: manufacturer willingness to sell penetration fire stopping products to contractor or to installer engaged by contractor does not in itself confer qualification. And then if it's going to be installed, if the project is going to be insured by FM Global, they actually have a list of approved contractors. So there's a couple of examples of covering whether it's the subcontracting entity, whether it's the supervisor or the individual installer. Of course, welding certificates are for individuals. Matt, we can go back to Dave now.
Okay, and one of the examples that I'll use in some of my concern, we've seen some excellent results when doing stained concrete, and we've seen some really disastrous results doing stained concrete. And once you stain it, there is no going back.
No, there's nothing you can do about it.
So having learned our lesson, we now always require mock-ups. We actually require the names of the foreman and of the craftsmen that are actually constructing the mock-up, and those are the only folks allowed on the site to construct the final product. So, we do look at some of these things, and it's not always the business entity that you want to qualify necessarily, but you may want to get down to those craftsmen and the supervisors out in the field.
Yes.
So much like the manufacturers, we can also rely on industry associations. And I don't know if Stephanie Staub is on with us today, but she is representing the Architectural Glass Institute. She told me she would be here. They are actually in the process of developing an industry association for architectural aluminum and glass, where it's actually a certification program that involves both the business entity, the contractor, and the craftsman in the field to be able to show a minimum qualification for both, so that if you can specify the compliance with the certification program, at least you have some assurance that you're getting a minimum industry accepted level of quality in the field.
Yes, and of course, I think there's it seems to be a widespread movement to try to get more and more people, types of installers with some sort of level of certification, especially for the critical elements like the air barriers and like fire stopping, that those are really, really important. And so it's good to have some sort of third-party assurance that the installation is going to be acceptable and is going to do what it's supposed to do.
Right, because if you're relying on some of these standards, you can specify them, but who's actually monitoring compliance? And
Yes.
Are the standards really set up to monitor the end results for compliance?
Of course, we all know that GCs take all that stuff very seriously. They read every set of installation instructions, and they look over the shoulders of all the mechanics, don't they?
Of course they do. They can't be everywhere. We give them credit for trying, but they can't be everywhere. And sometimes it does come down to the individual building the project.
Wayne Yancey raises the question, can I specify that the work is to be done only by journeymen?
You can. I mean, that as a specifier, you can. That might raise some concerns locally. I mean, by making that choice, I presume you're looking for union labor. In some jurisdictions, that's probably not going to fly well, but perhaps in yours it would, as opposed to apprentices. Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, manufacturer requirements. Is there factory training available that we want to require them to have had? Certainly, that's something we want on liquid applied air barriers. Is there factory authorization? That is, I was telling David the other night when we were preparing for this that I had an experience in Cincinnati some years ago, back in the late 80s, for a project. I specified a 4-ply, no dollar limit, premium built-up roof, and with a 20-year no dollar limit warranty. And the installer installed the roof, did a really nice job, very high quality, good looking roof, and then told the general contractor that he was not authorized by Johns Manville to do warranted installations. And the contractor realized that since we had specified a 20-year no dollar limit warranty, that he was then on the hook for that warranty. And he quickly got together with the owner and made a financial settlement to get out from underneath that requirement. So based on that experience, I have for years then specified that I want to see, as an informational submittal on roofing, a letter from the manufacturer stating that the installer is in fact authorized to do warranted roof installations. And they can be in the form of a letter to the installer saying we've looked at the drawings and specs and yeah, you can go ahead and install the roof.
So if the manufacturer authorizes the contractor, that's enough of a qualification?
Well, that's at least going to make sure that the warranty is in effect.
And does that sort of thing work for all products, Louis?
I don't know. I haven't tried it for other things because I don't know that in the case of warranties in roofing in particular, anybody can buy roofing materials from any of the major manufacturers, but not everybody is authorized to do a warranted installation. And because the roofing manufacturers are serious about their warranties, they are only going to warrant installations by installers that they have good experience with and have some confidence in. And so that sets a standard that is very important. We're missing a slide.
Well,
I added a slide last night.
I think I know where it is.
It's over on the side.
We'll find it. Where did you put it?
I put it off to the side from that one.
Oh,
Okay.
then that didn't make it in. I'm
It's not
sorry.
there.
You're going to have to explain it, Louis.
Okay.
'Cause I downloaded it, I think, before you added it.
Okay. Let me get that in front of me. It has to do with the manufacturer qualifications. That let's see, just a second here, and because I want to read this exactly the way it's written. This is again from Master Spec, and it's in the section on joint sealers, joint sealants. And let me just call this up on the screen. And
Sorry to put you in a bad spot here.
That's okay. I added it late last night, and I guess you just somehow it didn't get transcribed. You must have copied it before I did that. Okay. What's an issue here is, again, we can specify all kinds of stuff that has no existence in reality. And I think we have to be careful about that, obviously. And so I'll tell you what, Matt, could you show my screen again for just a briefly here, and we'll take a look at this together. Okay. Everybody see here. This is, again, this is from the Master Spec version of 079200 joint sealants. It says installer qualifications, an authorized representative who's trained and approved by manufacturer, by the manufacturers. So we can go back to David now, please, Matt. So the question is, does anybody know of any sealant manufacturer who trains, installs, and approves sealant installers? I don't know any. Do you know any?
I'm not aware of any, Louis, and I think that's one specification requirement, and I know it in the sealant section. It's not the only place that it occurs in Master Spec, but it's one of those that could be easily believable and could easily be included in the spec, but then push come to shove not be available.
Yeah, it's one of those things that sounds good, but in fact what happens is it's a matter of credit rating, as we've said here, if you've got the money and a truck to pick up the product, you can buy as much joint sealant as you want and become a joint sealant installer.
Okay. A couple more things that
and that's, you know, one of those things. It's a fairly critical, a product of rather critical importance, and yet there are no real standards for installer qualifications, is my point. So that comes up to, it leads us to specifying experience for joint sealant installers or other people.
Right, and this goes back to Dave Metzger's comment on the year's experience. That's not always permitted by the local jurisdiction, Virginia being one case for sure that I know. And even if you do specify years of experience, how many years are you going to require? 5 years? 10 years? Is it 5 years good experience, 5 years mediocre experience, 5 years experience doing things incorrectly? You know, how are you going to determine it just by years of experience? To me, that doesn't give you very much to stand on to know that you've gotten a qualified contractor. I would be more interested in finding out that they've done similar projects and being able to collect references, especially if I'm working in an area that I may not be totally familiar. So that if you could call up a building owner or another architect and know that you're going to get a decent reference for the contractor, yes, they did a great job, they were responsive, they took care of the minor problems, and the project turned out great. I mean, those are the kinds of things that you would like to hear, as opposed to something like 10 years experience.
And of course, this is where we really have to rely on the contractor, because they have much more experience with their subcontractors than we do in terms of actual performance, and you know, references are not always reliable as such, and so and certainly we're, as architects and engineers, not often able to determine if a given installer has sufficient staff. And so this gets back to dear old Sheldon's question. If we accept a submittal outlining the installer qualifications, and especially if it's based on something as subjective as experience, do we have any liability if problems arise? And I would suggest that even if it's an informational submittal, there is always that possibility, because the contractor and the owner could both say, well, you didn't object to the installer. You asked to see their qualifications and you didn't object to them. So that is a possibility, but that's not to say that there are certain critical installations where you just really need to see those.
All right. So we're nearly at the end here, Lois, and we're coming up on the hour. So let's see if we can get through these last couple. The location may be important for the installer, especially if they have to provide maintenance service. For instance, the elevator is a great example, or even sometimes the building systems equipment, where you may want door hardware, wherever you might need adjusting 6 months down the road, or you need regular monthly maintenance. The location and that response time, especially if it's an emergency response, could be a critical consideration, more so than first price even. Okay, and this comes back to one of my big concerns, is if we are going to qualify some of these installers, just when do we want to see these qualifications? Because if we wait until after the bid, we could be asking for a very first change order as soon as we disqualify a particular installer. If we do it before the bid or during the bid, we may end up with a lot more work in reviewing information to be able to determine that an installer is actually meets the qualifications, and that may extend the bid time to allow enough time for that evaluation. So consequences?
Well, that's the one I was talking about, is that the conceivable liability for accepting submittals on installer qualifications rather than just relying on the contractor's skill, expertise, and judgment. Because if he picked them and I don't say anything about it, then it's pretty much his baby or her baby. Sheldon has a quick note that we can, let me read before we wrap this thing up. He says, what if the smart guys leave a subcontractor and start a new company? The new company, who knows what they're doing, does not meet the experience requirement, but the old company that has lost all of its skilled people and has years of experience may not have the same level of qualifications anymore. So,
good point. Thanks for sharing that one, Sheldon. Hey, and since we're right here on the
Sheldon,
hour,
Sheldon's always ready to borrow trouble.
Oh yes, an instigator always. Okay, as we're on the hour, I have to do the one final thing here. We've been talking about qualifications, and good friend Joe Scarpa, fellow Philadelphia CSI member, is presenting at Construct next week. He's presenting on the nexus of contract administration, quality assurance, and construction management, which sort of flows through the discussion that we had today. So he's speaking Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. for all of you guys that like to get out of bed early. Consider attending Joe's session. He's a good speaker, great guy, and I'm sure he'll do a fabulous job. I'll be there cheering him on or heckling him from the front row.
Speaking of being there, David's session is already sold out on the future of specifications. And I'm going to have a session on Friday morning. I've been chairing a task team for CSI and CSC that is publishing a new practice guide for multiple work packages for fast-track construction, and I'm going to be introducing that document on Friday morning.
Okay. So we look forward to seeing you next month, October 2nd.
And seeing as many of you as possible in person so we can shake hands and say hi and swap lies.
And Lewis and I will think of some topic for next month. We haven't settled on that, but we'll probably do a little bit of a wrap-up from Construct, too, for anyone that wasn't able to attend. And if any of our group here wants to volunteer to present 5 minutes on a session that they really enjoyed out of Construct, let us know, and we'll try to get you on for next month.
We did have one suggestion already, is to go into warranties in a little more depth and detail that came in the comment boxes, and so we'll take that under advisement, and we may just very well do that. Steve Groth suggested that.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the comment.
So, yeah, keep those cards and letters coming in, friends and neighbors, and tell us what you want to hear about, because we want this to be a group effort and a group project, and so if there's something that you think that needs to be discussed, why, let us know. We'll try to make it happen.
All right. So we'll see you all next month, October 2nd, first Thursday, 3 o'clock Eastern. Thanks. Be careful on your trip to Baltimore, and hope to see you there.